Here's the Banking Secretary, Rajiv Takru, on the new pension bill.
The pension fund, as you will note, is attached to the insurance bill also. So the pension fund is going to follow exactly the route which the insurance sector follows. And at the moment it is 26%. So I think we are all very happy. And I'm not going to make any projections and raise my own hopes and anybody else's hopes on how much low-hanging fruit is going to be gathered. But I'm sure there's a lot of interest. So we are not going to be disappointed. I can tell you one thing, and this is on the basis of people who have been dropping in here. I don't go around chasing people who want to invest. And sufficient number of people have come here and have been repeatedly requesting for opening out this. So I personally think that there are better days ahead.
To discuss the implications and the repercussions, Dhirendra Kumar, CEO at Value Research, joins us from New Delhi, and we also have on board Ashvin Parekh, National Leader, Global Financial Services at Ernst & Young. Ashvin, let me kickstart the discussion with you. What is the kind of foreign investor interest that you expect post the pension bill getting passed?
Well, I mean, this is something that keeps on coming up again and again. I think our policymakers perhaps are making one small assumption, a wrong assumption. There isn't too much of capital in the accumulation part of pension to begin with. I mean, accumulation in pension, which is going to be done by the pension fund managers, PFMs as they are called under NPS, they do not require too much of capital. The mandatory capital is very small amount. And therefore, 26% of that isn't a big thing. I mean, the real capital requirement comes up in the annuity part of pension, which is the second leg of pension after the accumulation. And in that leg, annuity is going to be provided only by life insurance companies. So they will need perhaps more capital at a certain point in time. I mean, I do take the point that the two are linked, pension and insurance, but pension per se, pension fund managers do not have a very large capital base. It's fiduciary risk they are running out. So, I mean, the market risk is entirely on the investors. And to that extent, I would say the capital requirement isn't substantial. And there are 6 PFMs at this point in time. As we go along, the list will expand. But the capital requirement of this sector isn't substantial. So one is looking at a very small amount per se. I mean, if I take let's say a mandatory capital of 50 to 100 crores per PFM, we are looking at 26 crore per, let's say, a joint venture. And therefore, the kind of money we're talking about is not substantial, if I have to really analyze it.
Dhirendra, what is your own sense? Because the pension bill allows 26% foreign investment, but it also proposes that if insurance sector foreign investment is high, foreign investment limit will be equivalent to insurance sector. Do you think the market has such high appetite in terms of investor interest to start with?
I don't think so, because, but let me just tell you that, the way the pension has evolved, that since there are 2 parts to this pension sector, the pension, the NPS, the way it has been approached, that all government employees coming, who have joined since April 1, 2004, they are part of it. The accumulation part, when they retire, that has to be annuitized. And the annuity part of it, then that is the point when insurance will face a problem in terms of is it adequately capitalized to provide for that scale of annuity. But it will happen gradually, and I don't think, and it can be predicted, it will be very predictable. One will have the profile of that, and there is time to prepare for it. And it's only a matter of time that one will have to prepare for it, whether the capital comes from domestic investors or foreign investors will be decided. But I don't think this pension sector, the pension bill, the way it was talked about, I don't think much is going to change on the ground, because all that has been done right now. Pension is the PFRDA was very much functional. It was conducted by a set of contracts and rules which was quite formalized. In fact, it was done by Mr. Chidambaram himself. So in that sense, not much changes, except that it was a big glitch that, here is some big reform coming, and it is held up on every occasion, and it has been able to find a shape which was initially envisaged. The whole concept started in 1998 with the OSS report, and it has taken 15 years for it to become the law.
Dhirendra, with schemes like PF, PPF and NSC, do you think the Indian pension sector is not going to evolve in a big manner globally? Yes, the size of pension sector is huge, but US or Europe, they don't have schemes like PF, PPF and, a small saver scheme.
Yes, this is a big, distortion, which is, it's quite funny that all government employees, their money will, coming into the force, their money will be managed by pension fund managers in the private sector, where there can be up to 26% foreign ownership. Whereas, all private sector employees, their money, the mandatory position is that their money has to be managed or generally managed by EPFO, which is the government, and they get guaranteed, quasi-guaranteed return, whereas these are market linked. So at some point, this needs to be, it needs to, converge at some point. And this is a distortion. Everything else is discretionary. When you look at the PPF, it is entirely a voluntary scheme. People can choose. And likewise, now we have the Swavalamban scheme as part of NPS, where the government gives a subsidy of 1,000 rupee per person for an investment up to 10,000 rupee to lower the operational cost. Likewise, so the discretionary bit is very much here too. I really wonder that how long will it take for people to move from something which provides guaranteed return to another thing which is market linked. Of course, the government employees don't have a choice now.
Ashvin, do you see the pension bill really helping to plan for a post-retirement life, and do you see considerable interest of customers now in the pension scheme?
Well, one thing is very clear. Right from the time this particular reform was actually conceived and envisaged, we did realize that there was a complete flaw in the basic assumptions. When it comes to mandatory pension, which is linked to the employment, there the employee does not have any option. He has to participate. In case of voluntary, which is a bigger challenge, that is to bring the unorganized sector, employees of the unorganized sector into pension, which account for almost about 89% of the working population of the country. Now, to bring them to the pension scheme requires a different kind of framework, a different architecture altogether. Somehow, our planners missed that out. They believed that the day pension reforms will be announced, people will stand up in queues to buy pension products, which is completely a flaw. What does this bill do? Let's come to that. This bill at least does empower the regulator to correct the original architectural mistake to the extent he can within the powers that he's got. Two things very clearly. One is he can change the compensation structure. Without the compensation structure, the push that is essential to really sell pension products to people is not going to come in. We saw when insurance sector was opened up and we had an open reward policy for the insurance agents, we saw a fair amount of push coming into the market on account of and large amount of AUMs being gathered by the insurance sector, even in the private sector environment, arising out of just a push. This push is essential. Now, what the new bill will do is will empower the regulator in completely changing the architecture if he wishes to, and also introduce larger incentives for the intermediation, because that becomes very essential. That's the most important part of this reform. The second is it does allow him to regulate the sector far more than he was doing out of the ordinance, and to that extent, I should say, it's really a very, very welcome thing.
But Ashvin, what is the bottom line here? The intention of the bill is all fine, but looks like you're making a case that this will not nudge the needle.
Yeah, exactly. See, the bottom line is that the flaw is in the underlying. The bottom line is that unless you have fiscal measures, and I'm not for a minute talking only about tax concessions. I'm talking about such fiscal measures which promote long-term savings, which push the savers' behavior, from away from short-term and medium-term to long-term savings, this particular bill per se on its own, I mean, the bottom line is not going to really make any substantial impact. Fiscal measures do not necessarily mean concessions. I mean, I keep on repeating this. They actually mean that you have to discourage short-term savings. You have to discourage medium-term savings. You have to push people to save in time horizons of 3 years to 5 years and more, so that infrastructure funding that the country requires can really be brought about through the domestic savings.
Ashvin, Dhirendra, good to have you guys on board with us and really get us more perspective on the pension bill.